just start by thanking you all for coming this morning to give support to Elaine and the family during this difficult time with the loss of the father and husband. Now, many years ago, there was a king who you may remember was well known for his great wisdom. And he was inspired to write these words: "A good name is better than good oil, and the day of death is better than the day of birth." Now, you may be wondering, if you've not heard those words before, how does that make sense? How can a person's death be better than a person's birth? Well, when we think about that, when we have a child, what do we know about the child? Well, very little. They've only just been born, haven't they? But when a person dies, they leave us with so many memories that we could even write a book about their life. It would probably fill many chapters if that person has lived for a long time. Now, today we are looking back at some of the special memories that have been left in the chapters of the life of a very special person to all of us here today. And that is Jim Stott, who lost his life in death on the 20th of August, just less than 3 weeks ago. Now, for Jim's surviving family here, his wife Elaine, his children Colin, Martin and Beverly, along with the grandchildren Andrew, Curtis, Chelsea and Lewis, and the great-grandchildren Isla Rose and Ezra, these memories are going to be particularly special. And no doubt you have many, many more than we can talk about today that you're going to remember for the rest of your lives. Now, when we look at the first chapter in Jim's life, it began on the 4th of January in 1938 when he was born. And he lived until he was 80 years of age. Now, many people today, you might hear them say, well, he's had a good innings. 80 years, it's pretty good. We're going to learn a little bit later on what a good innings really is. Now, Elaine first set eyes on Jim in 1959. He'd just been demobbed. He was still in uniform. She said he had golden blonde hair, a white shirt, and a lovely tan. Now, in Elaine's words, she said he was gorgeous. Well, not long after that meeting, they was to meet again at the Berry Palais. And Elaine was with a friend, and a friend dared her to go and ask Jim for a dance. Well, she dared and went and asked Jim for this dance. And following the first dance at the Palais, it was a custom for the ladies to be able to go and ask who they wanted to dance with the second time. Well, Elaine had already made her mind up, hadn't she? So over she goes to Jim and asks him for the dance. That was called Ladies' Choice. So she went over and Elaine and Jim was to have another dance together. Now, this was the beginning of a partnership that was going to result in marriage, and it was going to last for over 57 years. Now, that's quite an accomplishment these days, isn't it? 57 years of happy married life together. And that began on the 18th of February 1961, when they was married in All Saints Church on Walshire Road in Bury. In that same year, well, they was to hear the patter of tiny feet, because Colin came along in that same year, and that was followed by Martin in 1963, and in 1965 the family was complete when Beverly was born. Now, just 1 year later, in 1966, not only did England win the World Cup that year, but the Stotts made a decision and they was going to move to Australia. Now, no doubt as a family you have many, many happy memories of life in Australia. And the family just wanted to mention a few. We are limited with time here, aren't we? But one of them in particular was one when Colin was a child, and he decided he was going to light a fire. Well, we know what it's like in Australia. It can be very dry, can't it? So he lights this fire in the garden, and before long the fire's chasing him up the garden path and sets fire to the fence. So what happens? Well, they've got to call the fire brigade. Now, this is embarrassing because at that time, Jim was serving as a fireman in the New South Wales Fire Brigade. So can you imagine when the fire brigade turn up? Well, there's certainly a red face for Jim, but then Colin, well, he ended up with a different part of his anatomy that was turning red. But we'll let you figure that one out, shall we? Now, Colin was obviously a chip off his dad's old block, wasn't he? Because when you think about it, when Jim was a young boy, and he was only about 10-year-old, well, his sister Nellie decided to take him to the pictures. And he was really looking forward to this film. It was The Wizard of Oz, and he'd been looking forward to it all week. And as he sits down in the cinema, what happens but a lady sits right in front of him with a big hat on. Well, Colin has been looking forward to this. He's fidgeting. He's looking one way. He's trying to see the other way. And then eventually he just knocks the hat off. But you can't cope with it. He wanted to see the film. Well, again, you can imagine, can't you, that Nellie, his sister, she ended up with a red face. Colin, well, we won't. Sorry, it was Jim this time. Like Colin, ended up with a part of his anatomy that was red. Now, I've got a few experiences from Martin as well, and I'm going to read them as it's Martin's experience. I'm going to read it as Martin is explaining this, and he puts these experiences under his wonderful dad. So this is what Martin said. He said, well, Dad had bought Colin and Beverly new bikes from the Knock and Derby department store. Well, there was only 2 bikes left, so I ended up having none. But his wonderful dad, having consoled me for a while, later said, leave it to me. Well, about 3 weeks later, when that's Martin, had forgotten nearly all about it, his wonderful dad hadn't. And one night, after coming in from work, he saw his dad writing or circling advertisements in the paper, the Manly Daily newspaper. And about 7 o'clock, he said, right, Martin, let's go. Where did they go? Well, they jumped in the Ford Falcon, and as they set off, he said to Martin, now, whatever you do when we get there, don't look excited. Now, the reason why he said that is Jim was only wanting to pay $50 for this bike. Now, you can imagine when they got there and Martin saw the bike, his face lit up, and he couldn't hide his excitement. Well, that wasn't good for Jim. He had to pay what they wanted, and that was $75. So it cost him another $25. But Martin continues, he says he loved the bike. He used to go to school on it. When he went surfing with his friends, he would go on the bike, and he just wanted to make a note that his bike lasted longer than did Beverly and Colin's, which was brand new from the store. He also wanted to talk about the time, the quality time really, that he spent with his dad, along with Bob and Joe and Imran, as they would go to the Newmarket every Friday for a few drinks. And he said that without fail, as soon as they got in, his dad would go straight to the jukebox for the Elvis Presley American trilogy. That would be the first thing that would come on, wouldn't it? Well, in August 1977, Martin said that he found that his mum and dad was quite distressed at this time, and he knew that there was something major had happened, and it had rocked them. And he later found out it was the news that Elvis Presley, in that time in August 1977, well, he'd had an heart attack and died, hadn't he? And this was really why Jim and Elaine were so upset. But then he continues in his experiences by saying, but it was on Monday, the 20th of August 2018, when my life was rocked. And that was when he said he lost his wonderful dad. Now, while Elaine was carrying Martin, she had started studying the Bible with Jehovah's Witnesses. And then in 1968, she was baptized. In 1969, the family was to attend what is now really a famous convention, an international convention that was taking place in Melbourne. Well, they lived in Sydney. It was a 550-mile trip to go to this convention. You can imagine, can't you, having to go there? And just the day before, the car breaks down. So what do? Well, Jim works with a chap. He's got 2 cars, so he says, can I borrow one? So they borrow one of his cars. They end up 35 mile away at a campsite. Now, you can imagine this, can't you? We know, many of us here, if you are Jehovah's Witnesses, you know what a convention's like. 3 children, 8, 5 and 4. And Elaine was saying when they arrived, they only had bread and jam, a bit of margarine, some pasta, a bit of porridge, and they was going to stay in this campsite. But what they remember about it in particular, they said it was one of the most memorable they'll ever attend. And that was because Brother Franz was also there, and Brother Noah. And they heard some stirring talks, you can imagine, can't you, at that 69 convention. Well, just 5 years after that, Jim himself, on 14th of May 1974, dedicated himself to Jehovah God, and he became one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And then 5 years after that, in 1979, the family returned back to England. Now, Jim was a very loving husband. Elaine will tell us that. He was a fantastic father. He was a great-grandfather and a great-great-grandfather, wasn't he? And everybody who knew him respected Jim. They knew he had a great sense of humour. Somebody said to me the other day, his one-liners was out of this world. He could certainly get us laughing very, very quickly. And one experience that Beverly and Phil had not too long ago was in Morrison's when they took him for some lunch. So they gets in Morrison's and they said, right, what do you want, Dad, for your lunch? Now, he wanted Eggs Benedict, okay? But he asked for Benedict Arnold. Now, if you don't know who Benedict Arnold was, he was an American general. He actually changed sides and began serving the British in 1779. So somewhere in his mind that was there, wasn't it? And he asked for that instead of the Eggs Benedict. Now, I don't know whether many of you know, but Jim was a very fit man. When he was well, he was very, very fit. He was a good swimmer. He liked weightlifting. And, you know, he even climbed mountains. He climbed Ben Nevis, Ben Ledi, Snowdon, and many of the lakes in the Lake District. He did them more than once. So you can imagine how fit he used to be. But around 2003, Jim's health began to suffer. Like us all, as we get older, his health suffered. He had a couple of TIAs, you may have heard of those, mini strokes. Now he was going to need strength not to conquer literal mountains, but the mountains that we all face in life, where we face illness, or things that this world throws at us. They appear like mountains. So where's he going to get the strength to face these kind of mountains? Well, no doubt Elaine and the family's love for him and the care that was shown by Phil, who became Jim's carer for the last 12 months or so of Jim's life, would have been of great help, wouldn't it? That's no doubt about that. But Jim knew from the time of his Bible studies that everything that happens to us in this system of things is temporary. He knew that. So for the next few minutes, I just want to share with you some of those verses from the Bible that gave Jim his faith, and that can help us today to face life's problems that come to us today. Now let's have a look together at a Bible verse in the book of John. So if you've got a Bible, I'm going to read the verse anyway, but if you've got a Bible, if you'd like to turn to the book of John chapter 3 and verse 16, and I'll read it from here. It's a very famous verse, this. You see it on buildings, railway bridges, sporting events. People tend to hold placards up with John 3:16 on it.